Okay, so welcome to today's webinar. This is the third in the series of Centre for Medical Education outreach webinars, and today we want to talk to you about our experiences and reflections on providing induction training for online learning. Before we start the session, I'd just like to take you through some housekeeping, some ground rules. So just to let you know that this session is being recorded for future training purposes. To minimise the any interference with sound and visual qualities, please make sure that your camera is turned off and that your microphone is muted. And if you look to the right-hand side of the screen, there's a chat box. If you put any comments or questions that you have in relation to the presentation in there, Lisi will be keeping an eye on this area and we'll collate some questions for discussion. Okay. So, as with all good webinars, we'll start off by setting out what our objectives are for today. So we'd like to discuss why we think having an induction is an important part of promoting a culture of online learning. We'll look at some of the reasons why induction is considered to be an important part of an educational programme before looking a bit about our experience of online programme delivering an online induction at the Centre for Medical Education. We'll then move on to talk about some of the key considerations in designing an induction, such as who your students are, the skills required for the programme, some of the information you want to convey to the students, such as their roles and responsibilities, how to establish online relationships, and role modelling good practice. So if we start off by looking at what an induction is and why it's important, this quote from Billing defines induction as a period during which structured activities assist students to become comfortable in their new environment, friends, intellectual challenges, and study requirements. And these issues are as true in an online situation as they are in face-to-face courses. Now I've chosen the image on the, you have to excuse me, I can never tell my right from left, but I think it's the right-hand side of the screen, because I think this kind of demonstrates what it often feels like at the start of a course. You've done your research, you've selected and applied for your chosen course, and you've got some idea of what may lie ahead, but a lot of it is still shielded in mystery, like what lies within a forest. An induction provides the opportunity to shed a little bit of light between these trees, to provide some orientation, and to identify some of the assumptions that we may make in delivering our teaching, and address aspects of what's called the hidden curriculum. So in designing an induction, it is important to recognise that the students will come from a variety of different backgrounds and have a range of different experiences. For programmes where you've got international student groups, there may be cultural differences and challenges associated with studying in a second language. There may be differences in academic who are perhaps more comfortable in a science rather than a social science discipline. You also have students who've got very differing prior experiences of education and expectations of how the course will be taught and delivered. So for example, some students may arrive having experienced teacher-led, lecture-dependent learning and may not be expecting a student-centred approach, which is very much focused on independent, self-directed learning and critical analysis. A further reason why induction is important is this idea of developing a community of learners. So online learning can sometimes be an isolating experience, particularly for mature part-time students. And it may be very different from the previous experiences of face-to-face learning. So the induction, through shared learning and discussion fora, can provide an opportunity to start to develop this community of learners. And a final reason why induction is important is to do with the issues of student progression and retention. So if a student begins a course without being provided with a route map or a clear set of expectations, this may lead to students underperforming and perhaps leaving the course altogether. So sharing some information at the outset and fostering this idea of community can help the potential of students to develop. In relation to our context, I'll just talk a wee bit about our programme here at CME. We've been running distance learning programmes for over 40 years. Firstly as a paper-based course that was sent through the post, but then since 2011 this moved online, and in 2016 it was further revised to be a cohort programme. We've got a large cohort of international part-time students who can study for a range of different qualifications, whether it's a postgraduate certificate, diploma or master's degree. We have 3 different intakes of students per year, and we run an induction for each of these new intakes and for those returning students who might have had a break between stages of the programme. Our induction starts 2 weeks prior to the start of each module, each credit-bearing module I should say, and due to our students being working professionals, it's largely asynchronous. We aim to introduce some social, academic and technical aspects of the programme and provide opportunities for students to practice without penalty some of the skills and tools that they'll be using before the credit-bearing modules begin. So it's structured in exactly the same format as our main modules, so that we're almost walking the students through the modules, signposting where they can find important pieces of information, support and guidance. It is the start of a role modelling process that we continue throughout the programme. So based on our experience of the programme and the reflections of our students, we'd like to raise some issues to consider in developing your induction. They are very much the same issues that would occur in a face-to-face induction. The key, as discussed in our first webinar by Susie Schofield and Jordan Napier, is to look at how we can translate what you would provide face-to-face into that online context. So our first consideration is about who your students are. What do they want and what do they need? So the student group may, as I said, have very different levels of interaction with online learning. You might have novices who've never been on an online learning course before, or students who are experts, who are very familiar with the way that the course is run. You may have people who are experienced as teachers in online learning, but have never used this environment from a student perspective. And there may be students from different cultural backgrounds who have different expectations of the relationships that occur between students and teachers. They may not be working in their first language and require additional support. And they may be from a range of different professional backgrounds. So some of the tips that we've identified of things to include to enhance your induction are the inclusion of discussion fora to find out about your students. Sorry, something happened to the screen there. That was. And their backgrounds. It's also a great way to introduce the students to their peers and for them to start to get to know each other. More experienced students might wonder sometimes about the value of an induction if they're used to using online learning tools. So including interactive elements, quizzes, self-assessment tools, and a learner contract can be a good way in which they can identify whether or not they have gaps in their knowledge or they need to brush up their skills in particular areas. And a final area, a tip that we have in relation to finding out about your students is to ask them for feedback. So one of the things that we've introduced recently in our induction is the section at the end of the induction where we ask what's new to you. So we're really wanting the students to reflect back on what they've learnt through the induction, but also what they didn't know before they started. And I've included 2 quotes here, which I think are quite illustrative. In the first quote, the student is experienced in using Turnitin as a teacher, but did find it valuable to experience the process from the other side as being a student. And in the second quote, the student has never been in an online course before, so everything is new to her. And again, this is just an example of the ways in which you are catering for people with different levels of knowledge and different needs, and how it's important to be able to cater for both the novices and the experts. The second consideration is to do with the skills that you want them to have in order to complete the course. So this involves looking through your programme and trying to identify both the implicit and the explicit expectations and requirements. This could relate to the approaches to learning included in your course and to the levels of digital literacy required. So some of the tips that we've pulled from our programme are that we seek to provide opportunities for the students to practice these skills without the pressure of it being part of their credit-bearing module. So some of the things we include are walkthroughs, walkthrough videos, which assist with navigating through the VLE, self-assessment questionnaires so that they can test their digital literacy. We give them tasks to do, such as locating the reading list, identifying a resource in the library, conducting literature searches, and a small piece of academic writing in which they cite and reference resources in the appropriate style for the programme. We also have a practice test of uploading assignments to Turnitin, so they get used to using the system and checking the similarity score. I'm very sorry, I don't really know what's happened with this screen and why these boxes are appearing. Okay, so a third consideration that we have are in relation to what are the roles and responsibilities of the students. So this will involve making sure that the students are aware of where they can find information on programme regulations, information on assessment deadlines, what to do if they miss a deadline, where to go for help or for extensions, information on academic misconduct and plagiarism. If they've got responsibility for planning their routes through the programme, it's important that they have information on how and when to select their modules. And it's also important to make them aware that they have a student voice. It's not a one-way process. It's not all being directed at them. They have the ability to shape the programme by providing their feedback and taking part in student participation exercises. So some of the tips that we have here are the things that we do, are that we try to ensure that all the important information is included in a student handbook. So this is all the information to do with the programme, the school and the wider university policies. This is something that we store centrally on the virtual learning environment, and we make sure that it's updated regularly. We also use active learning approaches as a means of demonstrating what some of these policies and regulations mean in practice. So for example, we include quizzes on plagiarism. We have a module selection activity where they're asked to look at the programme calendar and to map their route out through the programme. And we've also introduced a learner contract. So this is what you can see on the right-hand side of the screen here. I don't expect you to be able to read this, it's quite small. But basically it's a checklist where they can go through what we've identified are the core elements of the programme and just make sure that they're familiar with these aspects. So some aspects on here include asking that they have read the handbook, that they've read the academic misconduct policy, that they know how to use a university email, etc. And the fourth consideration is to do with developing online relationships. So this is to do with fostering a sense of belonging, and involves helping students foster relationships with their peers, with staff, and also connecting them to the wider university community, whether that be to do with academic and pastoral support services, or the library, or IT. It's also about highlighting the importance of the student voice within the programme and identifying ways in which it can be heard. These are issues that we'll be coming back to in our next webinar, which will be looking at developing a sense of belonging. So things that you could include in your induction are having welcome videos and virtual tours. They may never set foot on the campus, but it's usually quite nice for them to see where they're studying and where their colleagues are based in non-COVID times. A welcome message from the director or the course leader is always very, very helpful. The discussion fora as places for them to firstly introduce, but also to share their views and experiences. And other things that you could do, depending on time zones where your students are, and whether or not you have the appropriate resources, you might want to consider doing things like having a virtual drop-in, a virtual cafe, somewhere where the students can meet informally and discuss their studies. There's also the option of having an advisor of studies, and this is something that we're currently looking at. We have it for our full-time face-to-face students, but we're looking to extend this parity to our online distance learners as well. And finally, a fifth consideration is about role modelling best practice. So the ways in which we try to do this through our programme is really about demonstrating how they will be, how their future modules will look. So we basically, through the induction, model everything that we will be doing in their future studies. We introduce them to the tools that they will encounter. So if, for example, you'll be using tools such as wikis or Padlets or mind maps in your future modules, you might want to consider including them in here. We also try to ensure that we demonstrate best practice by making sure that our selection of materials is appropriate. So sometimes we have locally produced materials which are specific to our programme, but other times we link out to central resources for the wider university, or even external resources if these are appropriate. But it is important to make sure that these are relevant. So for example, if you're wanting to link out to a resource on referencing, make sure that it's in the right referencing style for your programme. And another issue is the opportunity to revisit. So our induction module, as I said at the beginning, is just a 2 week, the 2 weeks before the credit-bearing modules begin. But the materials are available throughout the period of study. They don't go away. We don't actively moderate after the first 2 weeks, but they can revisit. And the modules and all the content in the module is also available throughout the VLE, so that they still have access to it. So again, we've looked at some student feedback here and the ways in which they responded to the experience of the induction. And the first one here, you can see that the student's talking about the importance of active learning. She enjoyed how the level of participation and activities, that it wasn't just a lot of reading. And the second one, again, talked about the values of some of the interactive activities that were included there, but also the signposting of future resources that they can return to. So before I conclude, I'd just like to raise a couple of points of caution. And you have to be very careful, I think, not to overwhelm the students with too much information at the beginning. It should be a short introduction, so it's really important to think about what the essentials are. It's important also to keep the induction up to date and to regularly prune and remove content that's no longer relevant. In our induction, we give an indicative time to complete of between 10 to 15 hours. If the students start to say it's taking too long, it is important to look to see if some elements can be adjusted or removed. And finally, I think it's important to gather and act on feedback. The best way to find out whether your induction is doing what you want it to do is to ask your students. So in summary, I'll just leave this slide here for a second. These are what we've identified as the core considerations in designing your online induction activity. And these on the right-hand side are some of the tips and tools that we've identified and used within our induction program. Okay, I'll pass over to Lisi now if you have any questions or comments.
Hi, thank you very much, Cate. Currently, the question that's come up on the board is just around the using of that we use Moodle, and we use Moodle as our virtual learning environment rather than Blackboard, and the questions are around sort of, is this available in other departments? My sort of understanding is that that this is something that a decision that we've made, and we made the decision to use Moodle when we went on to the cohorted model in 2016, and I think every department has its own preference, and I suppose it's up for discussion really about with your own area and your own department, if you're in Dundee, what their preference and what they're using. Cate, would you agree with that?
Yes, I think in terms of Dundee, I think most of the universities using Blackboard. Is that my Dundee Blackboard? Is that right? I think the medical school is using Moodle, but I don't know where the decision about what system to use lies, I'm afraid.
Okay, thank you. And Jeffrey's asked, do you have video playback? Does that mean for this particular presentation? Yes, we've recorded this presentation, and you should be able to, you then receive a link for the presentation to be able to play it back. That, I think that answers yours. And then, does the induction course require once or in every course created? So we have it at the beginning of our entire program, so the beginning of the Masters of Medical Education, so not at the start of every module or every sort of different part of that. I suppose if you're running 2 or 3 different programs, you may have very specific, course-specific differences that may mean that you want to create a different induction module for each of your programs. But I would think some of the aspects that we cover within our program are quite generic and relate to getting used to the VLE, getting used to submitting via the VLE. So I suppose it would be up to you, up to what you choose and you decide to put in and include, whether you need a different one for every one of your programs. Cate, do you agree with that?
Yes, I mean, for our program, it is just at the start, when they start the studies. We have had a case, because we did move, our program was previously on Blackboard. I think you can tell Lisi and I are both not around for the previous running of this, but it did used to run on Blackboard. So people who've moved over from Blackboard onto Moodle have, but perhaps have already had completed part of the course, you know, did complete the induction there because it was a new system that they were using. But they would only complete it once at the start of the program.
Hi, Jordan. I think I might need a slight clarification around your question. So you're saying induction to me means an introduction to the learning environment. So any tips for how to run a virtual induction in place of an induction that we usually take in person? So by that, do you mean environment, the physical environment? I'm not quite sure. Beyond sort of what we've sort of done in the presentation around the hints and tips of how to run online induction, I wondered if you could maybe just clarify that question. I'm happy for you to ask in person if you switch your microphone on, Jordan.
Yeah, of course. I was just thinking that there might be other people on the call that are thinking we would usually have our students there for an induction, but at the moment we're going to have to run that virtually. So just thinking about how you would transfer some of that online that is usually done face-to-face, that might involve things like a tour of the department where you start to kind of get a feel for the different people. Any tips for how you might transfer that to something that's virtual?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think going back to Cate's slides, she talked about sort of almost video tour type of thing might be sort of a way to introduce people to the physical environment, and even maps of the learning environment. Obviously, it's not an issue that we have to, because our program's all online. I think it's a really interesting question, but things like that, so people getting a sense of it. For me, I'm a very visual person, and I think that would be something I would like to see. I would like to see the environment that I'm working in and get a sense of that, and even mapping out how the environment looks. That when I can think of like things like sort of a diagram of the different rooms and things might just help people get a sense of what they're coming to in the future.
Yeah, I think the university does have a few videos of the campus now. I mean, I'm not sure how many and whether they're appropriate to or applicable to just certain departments, but I think the university is producing more. And in the past, they have done things like recorded the principal's welcome speech, things like that, which can be shared with the online community as well. Mm-hmm. So I think it's just about thinking about what you usually do, what would usually be provided in a face-to-face contact, recording it and delivering it online too.
Yeah, and I think the even just the if you can, even things like for your putting yourself, the teaching team on the screen as well, and letting them hear your voice and things like that are helpful. And we do have that the videos at the start of our induction, and PowerPoint's very easy to record. You can actually do video PowerPoints as well nowadays and stuff. So all these things help. And Mandy and Susie are going to talk about this next week, about that sort of sense of belonging, sense of who the staff are, and also sense of the environment that you're in. Just one last question is from Judy, actually, about, is there a way that you could assess the impact? Hang on, it's popped away. Is there a way you can assess the impact of such an induction course on the student's learning experience or their final outcome in modules or overall program. I think that's really interesting. You know, we're exploring, we're doing work around sort of our formatives and the outcome and impact of people that undertake the formatives and how that sort of then goes into the outcome of subsequent modules. I do think that the learning, you know, I would be interested maybe to have a further conversation with yourself, with Judy Scopes, just sort of, well, with the learning and teaching team, to sort of look at how that, how they feel that people that have done the induction and haven't done the induction are ready, I guess, for moving into our initial modules. So I think that's a really interesting point, and maybe something for us to explore. So Sian's sort of talk there about how to balance the synchronized and non-synchronized sessions to maintain a balance to maximize engagement and interactions during the learning process. So this is for me, it's a very personal sort of one, is that you need to ensure that you as the teacher are engaging and bringing things together. And sort of so Cate and I, for the induction module, we will go in on a daily basis and actually ensure and make sure that people are aware that we're there, comment on people's comments, address any questions that people have. So it's not just about troubleshooting. It's about you're engaging in the process as well, and pulling together thoughts and ideas as well, and that helps that sort of that you know, if your role as a module tutor is to pull things and draw things together, and it helps with that sort of asynchronous processes, because you're kind of bringing it into a sort of synchronous conversation. So that's a great question, thank you. And Shihab, when considering who your students are, what do you think are the important differences between undergraduates and postgraduates with approaches to induction for online learning? That's a really interesting one as well. I guess for me, having moved on from undergraduate teaching to postgraduate teaching, you would have to really think around, well, what are the motivations and what are the considerations? What's important for undergraduate compared to what's important for postgraduate? And then you know, how do you bring that potentially the interest in and the motivation to, as an undergraduate, I would say is maybe a little bit more, having through my own experiences, might be a little bit more difficult to motivate them onto it, to undertake induction on a program and on a non-credit bearing way. Cate, do you want, or does anybody want to comment on that that's experienced both?
I don't really have experience of teaching undergraduate students online, so I don't really know. I mean, when I read that question, what I was thinking of is, in the current situation, knowing that my children are upstairs doing online learning, I think they'll be quite savvy when they start, because I think they're more used to online learning. So I think the key, and it's one of the difficulties that we have in our program too, is to try and make sure that the induction isn't seen as an irrelevance, and that you are still able to get over the important pieces of information that you need. So it's about tailoring it very much to your student group, but also highlighting highlighting what is the core bits of information that they need, so that if they're only going to engage slightly, that at least they get the right bits of information.
Yeah, and Judy's made a very good point there as well, to include the students and ask them what is important to them, and what their needs and wants are, and that's certainly, you know, we very much see the induction as a kind of live module. It's not just set up there, and you know, we will add things that are required, and add information if it's identified by the students that they have additional needs that maybe haven't been covered, you know, or are additional information that's required. So yeah, and it evolves and lives depending on the students. Yes, Judy, great point. Okay, I think that we should probably draw. That's us running 7 minutes over. So I think probably if we draw those questions, and I'll just hand back over to Cate. Draw those, I suppose.
Okay, yes, so thank you very much for coming along. I just want to highlight our next webinar on this slide here, which will be on June the 16th at 11 o'clock, and that will be on this developing a sense of belonging for your online students. So thank you very much. I think there will be a evaluation for the question for this webinar, which I'm not sure whether it'll be circulated to you, but thank you very much for attending. Thank you.